Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic, hoping well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Spider-Man No Way Home finally cross $1.5 billion at the worldwide box office, and before adjusting for inflation, it has also surpassed even the domestic total of that of Titanic, which is a pretty massive feat, and it's well on its way to eventually passing up that of Avengers Infinity War as well. All the while, the media continue to try and drudge back up the pandemic box office narrative for films like The 355, using it as one of the reasons why the film is set to be yet another massive flop, with us finding out just a few days ago that the budget actually was probably closer to $75 million, making this film in a much more difficult position to make its money back, on top of the fact it only made $4.8 million in its domestic opening. But before going into this and everything else we're going to talk about, including Ghostbusters Afterlife, which just hit a major milestone, which I know a lot of people on the channel will be very happy about, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure you subscribe to the channel with that bell notification on, that way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. One of these days, I'm going to be able to say that with so much precision that you'll actually understand what I just said, but until that day happens, good luck. Anyway, as I was mentioning before, Sony's Spider-Man No Way Home has made another $33 million domestically, a 41% drop. So in the fourth week of release, it continues to have very small drop-offs, which just makes me so happy because, one, the film is really great, and two, because this just once again throws into the face of Scotty Boy Mendelsohn all of that nonsense that he decided to make up the other day, and rather the week of Christmas, where he tried to argue, well, the 68% drop is one of the worst of all time, and when you ipso facto compare this to The Last Jedi and Shang-Chi, for some reason he came up with those two movies, it actually bodes well for them. And then, of course, the next week came, and it dropped within less than 20% of the previous weekend, and of course, I had already called him out because he did not even think to consider the fact of where Christmas Eve and Christmas Day fell this year, having a major impact on that weekend's box office. And so it's just really great to continue to see Spider-Man No Way Home just shove that right back into Scotty Boy's face. We also actually saw a pretty impressive weekend, a third weekend now, for Sing 2, which made another $11.9 million. And the reason why it's impressive is, for one, Sing 2. Who would have thought that we would have gotten to Sing 2, let alone that people would actually want to go see it? It's actually gotten to the point now where profitability is a very likely scenario. In its third week of release, still making over $10 million, and there's not really a whole lot of competition, especially with films like Morbius moving later in the year. Basically, Spider-Man No Way Home is going to be easy to continue to be at the number one spot, and Sing 2 arguably will also continue to be easy to stay at that number two spot as well. And as we continue to move into the month of January, and also, of course, we've got 3-Day Weekend coming up with MLK. It actually would probably going to be a film that does relatively well on that holiday weekend, with families going out to go see it. And also, it continues to, I think, also kind of shove the narrative of Omicron in their faces, because this is a non-Spider-Man movie that is still going to be able to make its money back, and it was not a cheap film to make. It was not one of the most expensive of the animated films to be made, but still, the fact that it's making money, people are going out to see it. It's made over $100 million domestically as well for the type of film that it is. I would say and argue that is still pretty impressive. Not so impressive is The 355, which, as I said, at over 3,000 theaters, opened to $4.8 million, which is abysmal, only just ahead of The Kingsman in its third week of release, $3.2 million, which, even though these are films having pretty strong drops, 28% for The Kingsman, and the number 5 film, American Underdog, dropping 38%, this is, again, very strong. The issue, of course, is that those are drops from not very large numbers. So in both of those cases, The Kingsman and American Underdog, they really didn't have very impressive opening weekends. The big issue with American Underdog is the fact that there is no budget that has been yet posted for this film. So no one has been able to tell us exactly how much this film costs. So it's impossible to really gauge just how well or how successful or not successful this movie is. And as soon as we get that information, I would be glad to plug that in and actually be able to make some projections there. While we look at The Kingsman costing at least $100 million to actually make, still a pretty massive financial loss for 20th Century Studios, which has had a really rough go this year, as almost all of the 20th Century Studios releases, all the films that were in development before the Disney deal went through, have all almost all, done very poorly, with one exception to my knowledge, remembering, was Free Guy, which actually did pretty well. But that, of course, was helped a lot by its release in China, because Disney is very quick to make deals working with the Chinese Communist Party, where Sony, so far, at least at this point, as of today, has not made those deals, and I continue to pray that they don't, because the last thing we need are millions upon millions of extra dollars going to the Chinese Communist Party, since they keep 75% or so of any box office receipts in their country, which means that will be millions of extra dollars that they'll be able to use to continue to have their Uyghur concentration camps and their other camps that exist, and continue to treat their people as trash. And I really hope and pray one day the people are able to stand up to that and take their country back. And that's all I will say on that. Matrix Resurrections is dropping off like a huge weight. Again, not going to get anywhere close to breaking even. In fact, could even be very close to the negative $200 million loss mark by the end of its run, as no one's going to see it, and it is just not making any more money at this point in time. West Side Story in a very similar situation. Many are saying, hey, well, you know what, it's going to get some awards buzz, it's going to get some Oscar nominations, and even though that does show typically a box office bump, for films like this, it's not going to be enough to make up for the $100+ million that it still needs in order to break even. What I can say, though, and I'm very excited for this, I made this comment over on the Geeks and Gamers video as well, but I know there are, in fact, a lot of people who are fans in the Asgardian community here who were big fans of Ghostbusters Afterlife, and what I can now confirm, Ghostbusters Afterlife has made its money back officially and is actually now profitable. It has now made $2 million in net profit. Remember, this is just looking at it from a pure box office standpoint, so just looking at the actual box office numbers, the reported budgets, and that is, of course, all we can really work with here. I can obviously have my own speculation and my own commentary about why I think it could have made some more, but again, doesn't really come into play with the box office. And I can also, of course, add in the caveat that this is going to obviously make a little bit more money as the 4K is on pre-sale, and I know for a fact many people, especially in this community, are buying that up in droves, and I imagine that it'll make a pretty penny in the physical media market, especially since it is a part of a special collector's edition set with the other two Ghostbusters films. And yes, I said the other two Ghostbusters films, which has also been selling like hotcakes and was on sale for like $100 on Amazon, but has now been sold out. So if you were able to get that deal and you are a big fan of Ghostbusters, congratulations. I was holding off, and of course, just like normal when I hold off from buying those kinds of things, the moment has passed. So anyway, those are the breakdowns just of those specific films. So going into just some of the coverage of it, obviously you can see SpiderMan No Way Home now at $668 million, as it says, sinking Titanic. The issue, of course, I had with that immediately was I was like, wait a minute, do you mean that the movie Titanic has been passed up, like officially, like domestically? Like, is it just the domestic total? I'm assuming that's what they're saying, since this is the current domestic number of No Way Home. And have you even taken the time and an attempt to adjust the money for inflation? So I decided to do that for them and show very clearly that, yeah, it hasn't really happened. So as you can see, when you adjust Titanic, which came out in 97 for inflation, the domestic box office for it was $1.3 billion. That's domestically. And it internationally, when adjusted for inflation, made $3 billion, which is kind of insane when you think about it. Like, when you actually take these numbers in modern day markets, you're like, oh my goodness, $4.4 billion. Like, the fact that was even doable is pretty insane. Also, it's interesting just to see the week-to-week comparisons, as obviously this film had a very, very long life that I don't know if this other film, I don't know if it's going to really be able to compete in that way. But hey, kudos to Titanic. Let's see what happens when you take off the actuals number, if that's the number that they're actually comparing it to. Yes, so they are saying that because 659.3 is what the number was reported as for Titanic, instead of doing any type of adjustment for inflation, that they are instead just going to look at it from that angle. So again, I think that's kind of a cheap way of being able to say that it beat Titanic. The one that to me makes more sense is that they mentioned in their article, right, that the film is going to be passing Infinity War next. Well, when you adjust this one for inflation, there's actually a very good chance that this film, in fact, I think it's an inevitability that No Way Home will actually officially pass up Infinity War, even when you do adjust for inflation, as these films came out relatively near each other, again, with the last 5 years or so. I also love how Deadline is at least admitting one fact fact, which is the 355 is dead on arrival with only $4 million domestically. So again, pretty awesome to see that bit of news. So going into some of the individual charts, $1.5 billion for Spider-Man No Way Home. So as I've said, it is expected to get around $1.75 billion by the end of its run. I think it has a chance of $2 billion. And then remember, this is all without China. And I'm sure that everyone will mention saying, well, if it gets a China release, it'll reach $2 billion, which might be true, but at what cost? At what human cost? Sing 2 now at $190 million. So again, pretty well on its way to breaking even there. 355, $4.8 million. And as you can see, they are reporting here on the numbers. Again, $75 million production budget, but it is also being reported on Deadline as well that is the production budget as well. So even though there have been other reports of $40 million, you can even go, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll see it says 40 to 75 million. By the fact that it's being posted right now as fact on the numbers, and that Deadline typically has much better resources when it comes to getting those kinds of numbers, I'm going to go with that one as the likely budget cost, whereas the other one, the other source, I believe, was Hollywood Reporter or one of those places, and it was from a while ago the article came, so it's likely that might be out of date at this point. Kingsman, only $74 million, so might pass 100 million worldwide, maybe. Be pretty hard to do so at this point, but hey, I guess anything's possible. Matrix, again, dying off, not doing much of anything. West Side Story, also, again, not doing much of anything. It would be lucky to get to the $100 million mark at this point. But as I know many people are excited about, Ghostbusters Afterlife, $191.1 million worldwide, making this film cross the $187.5 million minimum it needed to make, and the film has now broken even. So let's go ahead and go to some charting. Everyone knows I love me some charts. You can find this over at my website, ombreviews.com. And as you can see, with the 355, $4.8 million and the budget of $75 million, right now the film is set to be a $109.6 million loss. The Kingsman also over $100 million in losses. Sing 2 down to 12.9. As I said, this film is very likely to get to the break-even point. Matrix Resurrections, $210 million in losses. Again, slowing down so much, it could even crap out just around $200 million. Remember, this is a film that's going to at least lose 157.8, but it's not looking like it's doing anything to the point of getting to the best case scenario, meaning it's going to get closer to the worst case scenario, which is just around $200 million in financial losses. So again, another huge loss for Warner Brothers there. Spider-Man No Way Home with $1.5 billion is now at $621 million in net gain. West Side Story is still over $100 million in losses, and you can see the other films here. But as I said, also, again, very exciting news, $191.1 million for Ghostbusters Afterlife means it's now made $2.1 million at the box office. It is no longer a box office failure. It is a box office success. Not a hit by any means, but still not in the red, and that ultimately is very important, as well as those potential, massive amounts of money it'll be getting from its Blu-ray and 4K sales. So with the adjusted numbers for the 355 being $75 million for the budget, it means that the break even now is 187.5. Having only $4 million in its opening weekend, even if it had the best drops week on to week on in a row, the chances of it getting to that point are not very likely. Also, if anyone can find a budget for American Underdog, I'd appreciate it, because it will definitely help us to know exactly how well this film will do or not do. It's impressive that for such a smaller film, not getting a lot of press, that kind of stuff, it's doing as well as it is. I've heard a lot of positive things about it. Still, you know me, I like to know the numbers, and I'm still waiting on those. Kingsman as well. Again, I believe that the budget has not yet been confirmed, and obviously I will be changing these charts if these numbers and as these numbers become available. And of course, you can check this out at ombreviews.com to find out more about box office tracking. In fact, if you go to the main page, you'll see the last thing I want to show, which is, of course, the battle between MCU and Sony, specifically this one film. So while Spider-Man No Way Home, right, $200 million budget versus the entirety of the MCU, which was $550 million. The domestic box office, I have not updated that number yet, but $668 million is now well above all of the MCU titles from this year. Yeah. That's pretty darn impressive. The $1.5 billion that it's made so far worldwide is well past the $1.2 billion worldwide that has been made by all three of the major MCU films this year. And of course, the $97 million in losses that the MCU has had, nowhere close to the $621.1 million that this film has made in net gain and net profit. Now, I will say that Spider-Man No Way Home has actually been pretty good news for Disney, as Disney gets 25% of the net gain profits. So out of that $600+ million, guess what? Sony gets 466.3 million of that, whereas Disney gets 155.4 million. And as of course you can guess when you do the math on that, that means that if you add in the 25% that Disney owns from Sony's Spider-Man into the mix, it means that the entirety of the MCU, including the 25% MCU of Spider-Man No Way Home, brings their MCU total to $58.3 million in net gain profit. So it's been able to make up for the MCU losses, but as I have mentioned in previous videos, let me see if I can actually get it to load up, because again, it's been having issues with Excel loading. If you actually look at the entirety of the box office, taking into account all of the films from Disney alone this year, it was looking already at around $400 million in losses. And so even if you take into account the 50 plus million or the $144 million in net gain that it would have had from this movie, it's not looking good for it. So as you can see from here from Disney, $416 million in net gain, net losses. This date is behind. I have updated Encanto, which is at $215 million, and the $401 million of Eternals. But as you can see, not looking very good for Disney as a company. Again, $416 million in net gain, or rather, sorry, in net losses for it. And so if you go back to that chart and you take into account how much money it's getting from Spider-Man, not nearly going to be able to make up enough for these losses. Anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about it still looking like a $300+ million loss as a studio for year 2021 for that of Disney? Warner Brothers, of course, is in a whole other dimension. This is not even including the losses that were made, the losses that were had from Matrix, which means that this film's looking to be close to $900 million in losses, almost $1 billion in losses, which one could argue is probably going to be made up from HBO Max subscriptions based on their numbers, but I think it is still important to point these things out nonetheless. What are y'all's thoughts about Spider-Man No Way Home continuing to just rock things at the box office, and also the thoughts about the 355 being dead on arrival and all of the various excuses being used for this film's failure? Keep in mind, the 355, we've even been able to look and see the origin of this film. Jessica Chastain went to the director of Dark Phoenix, which is in and of itself a terrible film, went to the director and said, I have an idea for a movie, and my idea is, what if we had a female-centric spy movie? If that is where you start, if instead of you starting with an actual character, instead of you starting with an actual story, instead if you start with identity politics as your starting block, it is no surprise then that you created a completely terrible film, to the point where even critics who would normally be on your side are going to start tearing it apart. Because if you say, hey, all I'm going to focus on are these key elements of gender and of gender politics, that is going to be something that most people, most audiences vehemently reject. And the 4+ million domestically shows that very clearly. When you're losing to Sing 2's third weekend of release, when you are barely beating out on The Kingsman's third week of release, that should be a huge sign as to where this film falls on the scale. But what are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, make sure that you vote in this year's Wednesday Raven Awards, as the ballot is officially open for nominations. So if you go to my website, ombreviews.com, and you hover over to Raven Awards 2021, you actually have the ability to fill it out in the site itself, or you can click on the link and it will bring you over, and you can submit your best movies of the year. You can submit your worst movies of the year. There's a lot of fun categories, and so take your time with that. Those won't be due until the end of January, so take your time with that. If you need a little refresher on films that came out this year in America, here is your list right here. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Let me know your thoughts. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my January Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members. Starting first off with Locals, shout out to Kara Tharp, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson, Biffer DeHobbit, and Robert Barnes. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on the Locals platform. Also a shout out to my Subscribe Star people, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson once again, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stan 4, John B, Mr. Roy Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on the Subscribestar platform. And lastly, to my Patreon supporters, my 30 Patreon supporters over there, animation commentator Brandon, let's go Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Hannibal Grimm, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle, 79, Lance, Laura, The Modern Major General Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ellen, Stan Andrian, Miss Martin Muses, Theodore Bendon, and Tina Bojan, and of course, Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. Thank you all so very much for your love and for your support. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and at the end of every video, please make sure that you support me over on Patreon, Subscribestar, or on Locals. Also, you get a ton of other goodies if you support at the Army of Asgard level and above. Starting at the Army of Asgard level, you get access to various giveaways that I do during the month, including various 4K titles. Many of them 4K Steelbook titles, and so if you want access to that, check out the Army of Asgard level on those platforms specifically. You also get access, once you are a Keeper of the Bifrost level member, to that, plus a podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where you actually get to ask us questions, and also, of course, get access to that and the library of previous podcast episodes. We're up to about 33 episodes now that we have been able to do. I think most of those episodes now at this point we've actually done it together, which has been a lot of fun. And of course, you can join at the Chosen of Valhalla live stream, Chosen of Valhalla live stream level, where you get access to not only all of those things, but also you get access to be featured on the channel once a month during the Chosen of Valhalla live stream with the other Chosen members, which is always a lot of fun. Also, during your first month, you get a free t-shirt sent anywhere in the world. You just let me know your size. Let me know the t-shirt that you want from the store over on Teespring or on TeePublic, whichever you prefer, and I will gladly send that out to you if you're at that level. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.